Well, welcome everyone to the 18th hour of 24-hour Connectathon. This is the 4th hour of Ancient Future Wisdoms. And in this 4th hour, we are hosting again the ancient wisdoms that we can use today and tomorrow to overcome the challenges and maybe walk wiser towards the future, and maybe even imagine our future in a more sustainable and comprehensive way. So we do continue to explore the beliefs and practices of our ancestors to shape our civilization to come. As the outcome, we would like to collect stories, index common practices, and of course, capture everything in a book that will be shared then broadly, free of charge. Before we start, let me just read a few house rules. If you want to speak, please raise your hand and technical support will unmute you. If possible, please keep the visual on, but it is your choice if you don't want to be seen, because all the sessions are recorded. If for some reason you are disconnected, just use the same link and just come right back. So the 4th hour is hosting the ancient future wisdom of India and ASEAN. And our great host, and Arti, because the group is slightly changed, I will let you introduce the speakers and also lead the way. But before I pass the word to you, I would just like to share one thought that I found as an inspiring one that is based on Hindu religion, which is quite strong in the region, which is saying that an emphasis on suffering, impermanence, and contingency, every act is suffused with spirituality and is meant to enable one to realize oneself. I guess conflict is part of it, isn't it, Arti?
Yes,
the word
absolutely.
is yours.
Thank you, Violetta, for this wonderful opening, and couldn't agree more. I think India really has a lot to offer to the world from an ancient point of view. One of my favorite quotations, and I'm not too sure if it was actually said by the man himself or the scriptwriter who came, almost 200, 300 years ago, later. The name of the man was Chanakya. A strategist, a political strategist, the kingmaker of this country. And he said, the extent of realization we choose to imbibe defines the extent to which our capacities must grow. Now that is loaded, that is heavy. And as the sun rises in the east, here, I welcome you all to India and the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, that's Philippines, Singapore, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, and Timor-Leste. So joining us in this session are Mitul Baruah, who is an assistant professor of sociology and anthropology and environmental studies at Ashoka University, and he's been working on water and water-led conflict around the Brahmaputra, which is the 9th largest river in the world. And that connects India and 3 countries, that's Tibet and Bhutan. So 3 countries that this river connects. We also have Sagar joining us. He's the director of something called Seeds of Peace, such a relevant name in this context and in this hour. Thank you, both of you, for joining. So Sagar is a peace educator and a leadership coach, and he's recently been selected by the International Training on Dialogue and Mediation. So, and this has been jointly organized by the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Sweden. So he basically works, does a lot of youth development work, dialogue, interfaith, harmony, and comprehensive sexuality education. So wonderful, wonderful mix of backgrounds that both of them bring. And of course, we have June, who's such a lovely human being. She's decided to stay back for this session because we've been having a couple of conversations before this conversation. And of course, she's an architect, weaving a transdisciplinary curricula, human curricula, if I could say that, through the lens of so many things that I've been hearing: quantum physics, evolutionary biology, a whole lot more from the sciences and the arts together. So this is where we are.
And don't forget Danica.
Yes, Danica also. So Danica, I would leave the introduction to you because like Violetta mentioned, there was some change in scheduling. So we are playing it by the ear. And over to you, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. And
Danica needs to be unmuted.
Like this.
Yes.
Hello, am I unmuted?
Yes.
All right.
You are.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danica. I'm originally from Slovenia, but last 10 years I've been living in Indonesia, in Lombok. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, and I'm a multitasking person. So there are many fields where I try to put my fingers on just to give myself an opportunity to grow or to help community involve and so on. I'm very thankful for having me with you today.
Thank you, Danica, and thank you, Violetta, for bringing Danica in and loading up our conversation hour. So this is an hour where we're going to be deciphering the ancient future wisdom from the point of view of conflict resolution, reminding us that the ancients, if there's a word like that, but it just resonated so well for me here, that the ancients of India and the ASEAN, as one of the most prominent across, let's say, even European, African American history, given the timeless, land, resources, trade, culture, and people discoveries. I think this is a very, very significant hour and a subject and a land of discussion. So the ancient history. India and what is today the ASEAN region have both found, their something called the Austro-Asiatic connection, that which link us to a common past of language origins. Even the governance models, scientific inventions, architecture, art, music, wisdom that has woven histories and stories that the world today is built upon as we've progressed with each of these threads of us as a humanity. So if I were to go a little prehistoric into things, since almost, I think 3300 BC, India has delivered to its own purpose and to the world the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan, the Mohenjo-daro urban planning and water supply systems. These are landmark creations. Sanskrit and its ever-relevant system of syntax, the concept of zero, the decimal system, arithmetic and algebra, yoga, Ayurveda, music. I think these are just a few of the aspects, if we were to look back to the unified India and the ASEAN region of the past. The cultural symbols represent a common story across sociological, scientific, religious, governance bases. But if we were to dig a little deeper, I think we would also find that these scientific and sociological discoveries were made by people and communities deeply invested in understanding the rhythm and the trends of nature on Earth. Like I say, within the planetary boundaries and even beyond the exosphere. But while all of this was taking place, I think conflict always stood at the center predominantly because of invasions. And the fact that globally the world has been, I mean, that's a larger perspective, not just India or invasion context, but I think the world has been in a state of becoming, and the becoming of its own human civilization. I think we've been in a constant state of becoming a civilization. It's a lot of work. We're not very old if we were to think about how many of us come for a short period of time, collect together as a civilization, as a race, and then die, and then the next one comes in. So this process and the longevity that we have has put us in a state of becoming. And furthermore, I think we are also limited by the fragmentation of knowledge, the awareness to weave a rather collective intention of harmonious continuation. So fighting and building more to fight, building our own human history, which is loaded with various reasons of internal and external conflict. So our wisdom sometimes stands under a question. So how do we rise from here today in this moment, in this hour of Connectathon? I would like to invite Sagar to share with us his experience about what has been happening at the grassroots to minimize the idea of conflict and build a better human collective, because that is something that we've been talking about for the last 17 hours. How do we build a better human collective? How do we, and Sagar, just to give you a little backdrop here, we've been arguing about the fact that we do not require leaders anymore, but we require spaces where everybody has the opportunity to lead ideas, to lead improvement, to lead change. And a very interesting thing came up in one of the sessions where there is an idea of rotational labor associations, where people undertake projects, undertake ideas for a limited period of time, and then that whole thing goes through a circulation. So these are some of the ideas we've been playing with. And if you are up for it, Sagar, then the stage is yours, and I hand it to you.
Thank you, Arti, for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on this panel today. I think the topic is very relevant. As Arti has already introduced, I work for an international peace building organization called Seeds of Peace, and I'm the director for the India programs, and we work with youth in the age group of 14 to 16. So these are youngsters who are just forming their opinions. They're open to different perspectives, and they're not rigid in their approach. So we catch them young, and we take them through a journey which starts with an international camp in the US, where we select youngsters from Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, India, Pakistan, US, and UK. So these are the 8 countries that we currently focusing on, whereas we have worked in 22 other countries in the past. The process is very simple. We are talking about ancient wisdom and ancient practices over here. In this day and age, we are going more technical, and we are forgetting the wisdom that's already there from thousands of years. You know, we are more driven by big jargons, which actually do not make much sense at the grassroots level. Like we have examples of Gandhi, who I mean, mobilized millions of people without any technology, without any WhatsApp or any text messaging. He used simple tools like non-violence. Then let's come together, satyagraha. Let's fight for what's right. And be there very non-violently. The same way we have forgotten the art of dialogue, and that's what Seeds of Peace uses to get these youngsters from opposite sides of conflict and actually make them sit and listen to each other. So the entire program is rooted in dialogue. They stay together for 1 month in a beautiful place called Otis Field in the state of Maine. And they spend this 1 month in a very natural environment. It's away from the cities. It's deep into the woods. There's a beautiful lake. And we have trained and certified facilitators who are basically youth who are trained to create safe spaces so that actual dialogue can happen. Because the current education system, I'll speak for India, it's more geared towards debate, proving your point right. One-upping the other person. How do I convince you? How do I convert you to my side? But dialogue is completely opposite to that. And when I talk about dialogue, we usually say that in dialogue, the intention is not to advocate, but to inquire, not to argue, but to explore, and not to convince, but to discover. Can we come together without, having an intention that I want to convert you, or I want to impose my opinion on you, or I want to believe in what I'm saying, and just drop that and stop that blah, blah, blah that goes into my head, and just listen with my entire body, with my entire presence, with my full presence to the other person, what the person is saying, and where are they actually coming from. So that's the first tenet that we use. The second thing is, in dialogue, we talk about your own personal experiences, your feelings, your emotions. How are you feeling in this moment? Okay, there's conflict, but how has it affected you? So that we don't generalize and we don't stereotype. So for example, we're saying that all Hindus in India are dash, 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 or Muslims in India are dash, 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 versus saying that I'm a man who identifies as a Hindu, and in my experience, I have experienced this. So I'm totally claiming responsibility. I'm not blaming anyone. And that's where we create this safe and non-judgmental space for all kinds of dialogue to happen. So we live in a very divided world right now, like especially what's happening in India. There's a lot of polarization on the basis of religion, different identities, the LGBTI community. So be it caste, even caste. A lot of people think that, oh, caste is an age-old term. When we interact with youth and in dialogue, the topic of caste always comes. And they are like, no, we don't know caste, but it's very deep-rooted over here. So how do you bring these conversations to surface? And I think that's what happens in the process of dialogue, where once you create a safe space and the person feels really seen, heard, acknowledged, and safe, then all these ideas, beliefs, values, which are very deep-seated, they don't surface because we don't create that space. What we always do in a debate is like debate on facts, try to prove the other person wrong. But then I would challenge what are facts, when we get youngsters from these opposite sides of conflict together. So when Indians and Pakistani students sit together and they say, you know what, in 1971 war, this happened, India won, we killed 10,000 Pakistani soldiers. And the Pakistani youth over there counter that with the set of facts that they have. And then they realize that, where are you getting this? And then say, this is my history textbook, and this is my history textbook. So facts are completely different in both the textbooks. In fact, they're opposite. We did a wonderful project called the History Project. We just compared like very eventful events that have happened in the India-Pakistan conflict, India-Pakistan-Kashmir conflict, and we just put them aside. That this is the Indian narrative, this is the Pakistani narrative. This is the Indian narrative, this is the Pakistani narrative for each of these events. And there's stark differences on both the sides. So that's how, with these kind of things, we go into a belief formation stage, and that belief later on becomes your value. And that's where you operate from that. It becomes so rigid that you are not ready to listen to the other person. So we have to drop that. So at Seeds of Peace, we say that the way life could be. So we teach them a new language of dialogue, which is deep rooted in listening. Like, how do you actually listen and make the person seen and heard? And after this powerful experience, these youth go back to their countries. So I'm the director for the India program. So I continue this journey. Now, this is something external, which they have dialogue about. But now when they come back to their home, we talk about the conflicts that are affecting us today in India. So the religion-based conflict. So we have a 7-day camp called the Interfaith Harmony Camp, where we dissect what is faith. Does faith mean only religion? Or faith could mean, for me, it could mean the lifestyle choices that I make, the transportation choices that I make, the food that I eat, or the sexuality that I choose to, display, the way I'm dressing, the way I feel attracted towards her, the way my gender expression is. So we look at different aspects of faith and how it manifests. What are the different intersectionalities? So for the day one, we focus on faith and various identities that we hold. Day two is faith and religion. So we really understand what is religion. We go back to the roots, like what we are talking about here now, about ancient wisdom and practices. And someone also quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. So how it started, why was there a need of religion? Who created this religion? And if we look at the values of the religion, would any religion advocate kill each other? or is it an interpretation? So that kind of gives a very wonderful, I would say, idea about looking at the things in a very different lens. And that's where the change starts to happen. So when they understand that faith is not only religion, faith has so many ideas and so many aspects to it, that the grip around that religious identity is kind of little loosened, and then it creates an environment where the seed is now ready for nutrition, and by nutrition I mean by different perspectives, and the seed grows. And what Arti talked about, that we don't need leaders, that's true. We need to invest in youth and prepare them to believe and to actually understand that they can be the change. So because youth today feel very, because we tell them you're the future leaders, but I challenge that. They're not the future, they're the leaders of the today. You can't suddenly become a leader if you're not practicing it on a day. If you're not being, in your being, if you're not practicing that, if your values are not getting aligned to that. So we do beautiful programs, like there's a program called Humanistic Leadership. So in this capitalistic world, we have forgotten where only the bottom line matters, the profit matters at the cost of anything. So how can you be a humanistic leader? So there are like 7 tenets. One of them is compassionate communication. Can we be compassionate? Can we be non-violent in our communication? Then there's deep listening. There are like 3 levels of listening that we teach the youngsters. So how do you actually listen and be compassionate about the world around you? So these are the skills that we train them on, and they kind of go back and implement those in projects. So we have a program called Be the Change, which is a Gandhian model. Be the change that you want to see in the world. Don't expect others to drive that change. You be the change first. And then they implement these things. And we also have a wonderful program called Critical Media Literacy, because media today is all about sensationalization. All news are shown in such a way that, it goes 24/7. So, I mean, how do you make sense of this? Be it Instagram, be it the traditional news channels. But in Critical Media Literacy, we take a step back. It's a 4 days program which takes them deeper into really understanding what is media and how do you critically analyze media before becoming a passive consumer. How do you engage in online platforms like social media? There's a lot of violence that goes on, and it's very important to redefine what is violence. Because today's youth only believes in direct, like they think that if someone is slapping or stabbing, that's only violence. But it's a complete spectrum that we introduce. And where are you currently, and where do you want to be? That's online bullying, cyberbullying. How do you become mindful of these? What you can do about it? So when I talk about like peace building in general, it's not a very utopian concept as such, like how we romanticize the idea of peace. But I would say that the humanity has never attained peace, and we never will. And conflict, I think, is an opportunity for us to kind of engage. And once we start engaging with that, I think resolution would be a very small term. I would say transformation. Like there's a need to move from conflict resolution to conflict transformation. And I think that's what we try to do through all these programs. And since these programs happen on a smaller scale, not many people get access to this. So that's why we have currently started a program called Dialogue Academy, which is online. It's currently a 10-hour curriculum where all the people, all the youth can go. It's a free program. They can sign up for a batch, and we currently do India-Pakistan batches where they understand what is dialogue, and they really talk about the conflict that's going on. I think there's a hand up over there, so
yes,
I'll pause over here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sagar. And Heine, we will come back to you after we've covered the panelists here. So thank you for showing interest already. And Sagar brilliantly said that, conflict it can never be resolved. It has to be transformed. I think that is a big takeaway from what I gather in terms of how we should be actually viewing conflict, because in our previous discussions also, we've been saying that where do we start, sustain, and sort of intensify the effort? What are those points of departure and what are those points of action that require a convergence at a global level, at a regional level as well, at an individual level also? So I think you're practically addressing all of that road mapping and that forward pathing for us. So thank you so much for that. I would like to now go to 𝐬𝐤 and have her connect what Sagar said to what we've been talking about. And after that, Mitul, I'm coming to you, and then Danica, you.
I'm so grateful, Sagar, that for the work that you're doing with the youth. I'm fascinated about two things. One, when you say Hindu, it was my understanding that that was a blanket that over multiple religions that were localized. And so I'm curious if the children are identifying as their local or as Hindi. And then Violetta's sharing of her quote struck me as something also that you had said in terms of what Arti just said, which I think is the most poignant thing. Peace is not some nirvana, bliss, altered state of consciousness as an escape from, or as, I don't know, fill in the verb of your choice. But peace is really what I'm hearing is this capacity for us to recognize that there's the existence of all of these other things, but we have the tools or some awareness or like this to be able to act differently, to think differently, to conceptualize differently, and in that space embody differently too. And I'm fascinated by how that difference or diversity of each child's experience then coalesces into a coherent or cohesive, really peace, like mutual. And is it in the Gnostic tradition of self as other? That's how I think of religion. Is most of the global religions that I've studied as a religious studies scholar has been to say that self and other, there's no separation, that it's I am unique, you are unique, everyone on the call is utterly unique. And yet there's this we space of a unified field, or, our genetics are so alike. And so I'm sorry to make such a wordy, but that's just where I was struck.
Great. Thank you, 𝐬𝐤. And we will respond to that in a bit. But I would like to bring in Mitul here because he's a professor and he's got a class coming up. So we've got to free him and actually extract the wisdom from him. So Mitul, I think while we are talking about this, one of the interesting things, and I'm going a little, beyond our current discussion, when we look at how does human civilization, settlements, how do they come about? So anthropologically speaking, they come about right next to rivers. I think that is the emergence of us. How do we come together? So that is how we become. And this is an important part because, and specifically in the region that has so much to offer to the world, but we take something that is in the context of this year, that is important. In the area of how conflict emerges. So water and rivers. So Brahmaputra, like I said, is the 9th largest river in the world, and it has stories to offer. I'd like to hear some from Mitul.
All right. Thank you, Arti. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks, Arti, for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. It's a privilege. And I want to apologize at the very outset that, I'm not very coherent right now. I mean, I joined this group rather late, and I had a 1.5 hours ride this morning from Delhi to my university, which is outskirts of Delhi, place called Sonipat. And so it was on my way that I kind of jotted down some thoughts when I was getting stuck in traffic. So traffic helped me. So, okay, I got some extra time and kind of, so I kind of, made some notes, and they're, to be honest, here and there. And so please bear with me. And, so I hope overall it will make sense, right? But it's very interesting where Sagar actually ended, because it's so coincident. I mean, I wanted to begin there, that is, conflict resolution, in academic debates, as well as in sort of policy parlance, often the resolution is often privileged, so we really want to resolve conflicts. So, but I often wonder, can all conflicts be resolved, right? So should we really talk about conflict resolution? I mean, given that, a lot of conflicts are actually manifestations of power structure in society, the unevenness, hierarchies, and which only deepens in a capitalist society. So, so can we really kind of resolve some of these conflicts? I mean, they are going to be there. I mean, we have a sense that, okay, we have kind of, it's like covering up, we feel, okay, we've resolved something, but it keeps coming up, it keeps coming back. And I'll tell you something from my own experience as to how that happens. So that's one thing. So should we, and secondly, in fact, I would go further to really ask, should all conflicts be resolved, right? So are they necessarily bad things, conflicts? I think this is something to think about. I mean, perhaps we really need to categorize conflict. Some conflicts at certain scale might be necessary as sort of checks and balances in society. I mean, we don't really, I mean, so sometimes conflicts create opportunities. I think Sagar also used that word. I mean, it creates opportunities for us to intervene in particular ways. They are also reflection of the fact that, how societies are sort of organized, I mean, it is through conflict, like traditional societies were not always bothered about resolving conflicts, right? So it has become a, nowadays, well, I during my PhD, I was studying at Syracuse University for my PhD, and we have a school called Maxwell School for Public Policy, and we have a program there called PARC, that is, I think, Peace and Conflict Resolution or something. And in that, there is just, I attended a few classes. It's just, like there's an overemphasis on resolving conflicts, like often without even trying to understand what is at the heart of the conflict. Why are people even fighting, right? Are they necessarily bad things always, right? Sometimes traditional societies live with some conflict, or even the potential, at least, of conflict, because I think that allows for, it works for them, I think it keeps some form of exploitation, etc., in check. Okay, so that's, yeah.
So Mitul, can you also tie this with the work that you've been doing?
So I'll come to that.
Brilliant.
So that's one thing I wanted to just begin with. So I would actually say, I think instead of conflict resolution, maybe it's important to think of conflict. I was using that term living with conflicts. I think Sagar's is a better one, which is conflict transformation. I think that's a better one, better phrasing, like how do you transform conflict to something else? Okay, so that's a bit of a little bit of I guess, the theorization of the issue. And I want to now, having said that, I want to draw on my own research from two distinct geographies to tell you a little bit about communities' wisdom and their how they have dealt with different kinds of conflicts. And they are distinct in the sense, one is some work I did in the past with tribal communities in southern Rajasthan, the Indian state of Rajasthan, where these are tribal communities living in forest. And the other is my current work in the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam with people who are living with flood for a long time. So I'll quickly touch upon those because I don't know, I don't probably have a lot of time. So so one is in Rajasthan, it's very interesting that these are, these are dry lands, drought prone. This is South Rajasthan, Udaipur, and those areas where there is a deep sort of resource crisis, such as, like forest and pasture land and so on. So I was, as part of an NGO called FES, Foundation for Ecological Security, I was working there for several years before going back to grad school, where we were trying to help restore the degraded common lands, degraded commons, which could be forest and which could be pasture land and all of that. In that, I was amazed to see how people have these fantastic ways of resource governance, and really kind of, and which is all about kind of, dealing with potential conflicts. I'll give you one example of, because there is these places have resource crisis, so not any village has everything. Like no village would have like a forest land as well as pasture land, or, or a water body or something. So what they have done traditionally is, and this is sometimes conscious, sometimes very unconscious, organic, where they have this, what they call a term called ℍ𝕠𝕤𝕥, which is basically a multiple user regime, and something that we only figured out after long surveys and understanding, living with them for several years, that what they have, the arrangement that they have is, suppose village A, I've actually written a paper about it elsewhere, but anyway, so to kind of put it simply, so let's say village A has forest land, which is kind of according to the forest department, it belongs to village A, but they don't have pasture land. But the forest lands are not necessarily for grasses, but they live next to a grassland which belongs to village B. But village B is actually located far off from their own plot. So now how would village A access pasture land, which is next to them, but legally doesn't belong to them? And how would village B access the forest land? It's far from them. And how will they make sure that their own pasture land, which is not next to them, is governed well, it's protected? You know what I'm saying? So it's absolutely complicated. It's mind blowing. And we actually drew like a map to show how some 20 different habitations, big habitations, have this fantastic arrangement of, it's like zigzag, like someone's going across someone's pasture land to get forest from timber from there, someone's accessing forest from here, someone's allowing their livestock to graze somewhere. It's just fantastic. So we kind of and without that, there would be conflicts. Of course, they would fight. I mean, imagine living next to a fantastic grassland, but your cattle can't go in because it doesn't legally belong to you. Of course, then you will encroach and you will kind of, sort of do all sorts of things, and you will get into fights. But there has never been any history of kind of, inter-village fights, because they've just come up with this arrangement. And they have a very interesting thing as to the penalty. Suppose an outsider would, somebody else outside of that ℍ𝕠𝕤𝕥 would come and sort of, use that resource, and how would you penalize that person? And again, they do things which are doable, such as they have devised a way of, based on the type of animal. Okay, suppose a camel is grazing as opposed to a goat grazing, or as opposed to a cow grazing. So then they have a different kind of penalty for those, So these are very traditional ways of figuring out, which animal would eat how much and which animal would need how much fodder, and therefore blah, blah, blah. And so it's just amazing. So what we did was we documented some of those, and we kind of put it forward to the forest department of Rajasthan, saying that, you have to amend what is called the Joint Forest Management, JFM. We have to amend the JFM rules to include this traditional ℍ𝕠𝕤𝕥. Otherwise, there will be conflict. It was a long story, but then finally Forest Department really agreed. And in Udaipur, Rajasthan, they had amended the rules and incorporated and allowed people who do not legally own these lands to be part of that institution. So that's one example of sort of, traditional ways of conflict resolution, sometimes very organic. I will quickly go to Assam, where I'm doing my work, and that's been my research for last few years. I have looked at the problem of flood and riverbank erosion in the Brahmaputra Valley. Again, like very much somewhat similar to the Rajasthan case. Here I'm talking about a river, and the river also is a commons. It is a common property. It doesn't belong to somebody. right? I mean, so, and when we talk about the Brahmaputra, as Arti has said, it's a transnational river that starts in Tibet and flows through kind of Northeast India and goes down to Bangladesh and then the Bay of Bengal. And, it gets, in its journey, it gets like, dozens of tributaries from all over. It's a huge, it's a mega river. Now,
it's an ecosystem on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam, people have historically lived with this river and with flood. So one of the problems, something that I have discussed, I've done ethnographic work and discussed in my kind of recently published book called Slow Disaster. So I have looked at flooding in Assam. Flood is a disaster, as we all know, right? It kind of causes all sorts of destructions and loss of life and properties and so on, but it has not always been so, right? People in the valley, in the Brahmaputra Valley, have historically lived with flood. They have wisdom, they want flood to come every year. There is a flood dependency, and we have turned them flood vulnerable. Okay, so they wait for annual flooding to come so that it brings in alluvium, which will make their land fertile. It will bring in fresh water, which will replenish their wetlands. It will work as a cleansing mechanism. It will help navigation. People go from places to places, and so, and it's also fun. I grew up on that island called Majuli, in the middle of the river. And, we also know, like, what it means really, So in so many ways, kind of, it's part of people's life. So there is rather a rhythm, so I call it a rhythm that people have with the river and flood. Okay, and there is what is called as a way of preventing any sorts of conflict between people during these kind of flood events, because somebody might be worse off than others, and etc. There is a moral economy of people helping one another. Sometimes there is kind of sharing of boats, for example, sharing of some kind of high raised platform, etc., etc. And also kind of adaptation mechanisms that have evolved naturally. For example, one community called Mising, M-I-S-I-N-G. So Mising, a community who live on the bank of the river in Assam, they have switched to, long ago, they have switched to like stilt houses, houses on platform, raised platform, bamboo platform. Why do they do that? It's simply that, these are flood-prone geographies, and, so that they are kind of protected from flood. So there are all kinds of ways through which people have lived with these so-called disasters. For them, it's a natural cycle, right?
Thank you, Mitul. Thank you so much. And
okay.
I would love to hear you. Yes, please. Last word on this before I go.
So then I'll just conclude by saying one thing.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I was going on.
No.
Okay. So okay. Let me just end by saying that what we have done is, what the government has done, the state, since the colonial period, has introduced this idea of flood control by building infrastructure such as embankments. Now, these embankments are bringing back conflict, because now embankments are separating the land into some people who are left on the riverside, some are in the countryside, and the river, now the kind of the whole vulnerability is now spatially very distinct. Some people are worse off now simply because of the structures. So people who lived with the river and these natural processes without conflict now are having to deal with conflict, a conflict that's created top down by the state through the making of certain infrastructures in the name of flood control, So now kind of, so what I'm saying. So then, of course, then we begin to talk about conflict resolution and all that. I mean, simply that we created conflict for them, right? So I'll end there because I don't have time, but I'm happy to kind of, engage in the discussion now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mitul and Sagar. I think wonderful. And if I may use the word kick-ass perspectives, because this is what we needed coming through in the context of conflict. I mean, we think of it in a very traditional manner that, okay, conflict, resolve, true. I think this completely just, it undid everything that we, held as notions about how to address conflict. And that has been just so brilliant and eye-opener. So where is my friend Danica? Yes, Danica. What have you been doing in Indonesia? Do share with us. We're very curious to hear that.
Okay. So lately, I love the talks that I've been hearing, because it's very educational and made me think a lot of perspective, which one I share about Indonesia and the life here. So I live in Lombok, and Lombok is a very religious island. Islam is the dominant religion on this island. And I think the values that Islam share are very deep in the people when comes also to the conflict. So the values that come out, I believe that somehow they show patient should be the one thing that in any kind of conflict people should use as a first thing to hear somebody else, because in conflict usually we have a dialogue, so it's usually between two persons, between two groups, whether it's a communal conflict or social conflict or emotional conflict, doesn't matter. But the patience is something that I've been really observing in Lombok and in Indonesia, because it seems like they were all born with it. So like, although Lombok have a lot of riots, and whether that is a youth riot or religious riot, it doesn't matter basically what is the subject of it. What I have been noticing that the patience was like a first answer how to start the dialogue. So with this patience, I could say that also brings obedience. So that this obedience comes from awareness and not from compulsion. So if we have obedience to hear somebody else, then we will not react compulsively, go into a higher conflict, but maybe then we can start to find the solutions or resolutions or whatever. I could give you two examples what was happening in Lombok. One was like a conflict because Lombok is let's say economically not such a rich island as Bali and Java is, but it's for sure on the way to go toward Bali direction. And because we got a MotoGP circuit, which was like a huge thing in our island, because that would bring a lot of new economy, the tourism will develop and so on. We had a huge conflict because the MotoGP track was built on a places where the villages were. And those villagers, because of a lack of education, a lack of a power, couldn't fight toward the government to say, hey, this was our village, we want to stay here. And then, of course, many experts got involved in this to help them with the PR, with the social media, to get appropriate attention that like, hey, this circuit, because of the capitalism, let's say, or because of the economy development, shouldn't be built here because there are people living here. So I feel that the voice of the villagers was not heard enough. And of course, the end result was they got a land across the MotoGP, so they just got another land so they could continue their living. But the voice was not heard, you know, so the conflict basically stayed, or it was like maybe put it under the blanket. And because Lombok people are Sasak tribe, so there is a lot of mixture of like a Hindu and a Muslim and the animism also in their tribe culture. It's really hard to describe, but like on the first ball, when you come to the conflict with a local person that is a Sasak, you could say that it looks like violent, but basically is not, because this is the way how they react naturally. But I feel that the future lies in, like I said, in obedience, that it lays in sabar, that means in Indonesian, be patient, yes. Always just be patient. And if we took this local wisdom that comes through basically, because Indonesians' desire is to live in harmony and in peace. And then this peace comes with peace with each other, or peace with the environment, or even peace with the God. And if we're gonna implement these local wisdom values, I think they can be a really big part of a conflict resolution effort.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danica. I think that was so brilliantly stated. And I think you resonated with what both Sagar and Mitul said about creating conflict and then getting at an individual level to address it, I shouldn't say resolve, to transform it or to make something better out of it. So I think that is just so brilliant that three of you resonated, to the idea of conflict per se in such a different manner, and weaving how do we understand ancient wisdom, what needs to flow from there, who we stand to be as societies, as communities, as a region, and what does that mean in the context of conflict, because conflict is understood differently by different communities, peoples, and races, right? So that's brilliant. I would love to go to 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 because his hand is tired being up. 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻. We are open for Q&A now. You unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Sagar, first, I fully applaud and resonate with your mission, vision, action. Fantastic. Involves the youth. My concern is you mentioned so often Gandhi, but you as a guy from India have also Tagore. And he was not just someone who hosted Gandhi when he flew from South Africa, but he looked also in the Tolstoy schools and really getting the bigger picture, the multilingual, multicultural issues in. Then Danica, there is a multi-track diplomacy and peacemaking effort done before the Club of Rome to involve the stakeholders to make deep root calling negotiations, not just between two parties, but multi-track diplomacy issues. I would like to discuss with you that further. And Mitul, have you in your region also salt marshes? Because at the UN climate summits, Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, now Dubai, we discuss to really bridge the salt waterfronts and the natural sweet waterfronts. So your approach to the commons, like Elinor Ostrom, I think she didn't study much in India, more Indonesia and in other countries like South America. Have you really looked into her tradition in Bloomington with Lyndon Caldwell to really empower the local cultures and stakeholders? So just three questions.
Sure.
So,
I mean,
yes, please.
yeah, I know. I mean, that's a wonderful question. And I mean, I mentioned Gandhi because it's, Gandhi is very visible and youth can relate to it. There are a couple of Bollywood movies which have come on Gandhi. That's not like, that's not to kind of undermine what Tagore has. And they're like wonderful leaders that they are all over the globe. But with Gandhi, I feel that he was very vulnerable and he was very honest in his approach. He never said he's perfect. If you read his books, he has just shared his life in a very naked way. So a lot of people criticize Gandhi for that, but I think I feel that it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. When you are given the position as the father of the nation, and still you're being so vulnerable and talking about the misdeeds that you have done in your young age and claiming total responsibility for that. I think it takes a courage of different level. And there are some quotes which are very powerful. So we have developed programs around that. But of course, programs could be developed on all of these leaders' quotes. And I think that's a wonderful thought which I'll explore.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Last word. Yes. 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, your hand is still up.
I was going to quickly answer.
Yes, yes, Mitul. Yes.
Yeah, 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, that's a great question, and point you raised. So yes, Elinor Ostrom's work has been very helpful, and I actually draw on her work, particularly looking at forest governance. But in my work on the river, I am more of a political ecologist. That's my perspective in looking into kind of river issues. And also some of these, in my work, I've looked at a lot of wetlands, which are freshwater wetlands in Assam, as opposed to like, salt marshes. And a lot of these wetlands are depleting. And, again, like I mentioned briefly, that a lot of it has to do with infrastructure built by the state and,
Brilliant. Danica.
Yes, and as my answer to Mr. Heiner, diplomacy, for the diplomacy, we need a willingness of both parties to be part of the conversation. And of course, that's a way. But in Indonesia, I think the religious elite and the political elite needs to be ready to listen the small people. Or the tribes or the villages. And after that, we can get to diplomacy, to the solutions, to the life without the conflict.
Yes, there's thank you, Danica. There's a very thick layer to penetrate before we actually get to the ground where more human issues can be addressed at a more government level, because that is the situation of crises that the region is in at large. Fortunately or unfortunately, we've completely arrived at the spot on end time of this session, and I can say this, that we may not be able to take any more questions, but I don't think so there will be any questions given the extent to which this has already been woven by all the four panelists that we had: June, Danica, Sagar, and Mitul. Thank you so much for giving your sharing your valuable experience and insights. I think it has been just so enriching. But we still have 1 minute if anybody wants to put in the last word before Violeta rings the bell on me.
No, I just wanted to respond to what June had asked about Hindu, the word. I think, June, you're spot on that. There's nothing called like, Hindu or Hinduism. It's a term which has been coined, I don't know how. I think there's a geographical identity, which the Hindu Kush mountain range, and people living across the Hindu Kush mountain were called as like Hindus. But it's not, the religion cannot be called Hinduism according to me, because it comes from the wider set of practices called the Sanatan Dharma.
Sanatan, that's right.
So all the scriptures and all that we'll read, there nowhere it's mentioned as Hindu or Hinduism. I think it's a geographical identity, which basically then it got coined as a religious term.
Also, there was something taken from the Indus Valley to bring about the word Hindu, mostly after the British invasion, the Persian invasion. That's right. Like so that's how the word Hinduism came about.
Indus it become like Hindus, and it's like it become Hindus after that.
Yes. So if we are allowed, I think there was a hand up, and we can take that. If not, then Violeta, back to you. But who do we have?
Vishwa.
We have Vishwa, yes.
Back to Ramit. I think we have to finish because it's already half minute away from the next section, but it was great. Thank you very much. A really diversified point of view and experiences, and that's why we have a Connectathon 4. Thanks a lot, Ramit. Back to you.
Thank you all. I will have to